In I want to talk a little bit about Straight as a Jalebi because that's a different story. And in this one, the brother, Ashi's brother, Sonny Gill, discovers a strong attraction to another man.
Yeah.
And there's hint of it in Marriage Unarranged, and then it's his story in the second book. So and the other man is the designer Milan Tagore. And so this was 20 years ago. Homosexuality was starting to become much more accepted than it was, certainly compared to earlier decades, but definitely a difficult subject to discuss with family. So I thought that whole his whole really coming to understand himself, as well as telling his siblings, and that was tough, very tough. And especially because he was under pressure to marry.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole story of both Milan and Sonny and their families putting pressure on them. So do you find that this writing about it from from the year 2000 versus now, do you see a change in that in your culture?
I think there's definitely a change, not necessarily in everybody's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because the older generations will still find this a very hard sort of concept to even want to accept. But then they also say that, sort of like, you go back to India, so that third gender has always been there with the eunuchs, so you're looking at sexuality, looking at gender and stuff. So these things have always been there, but they've never been accepted. Homosexuality out there in India, I can't remember what the date was, but I mean, even at the time my book is set, it was still illegal to have a same-sex relationship at that time. Whereas now, I think what you find is youngsters have grown up with more freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and access to more of what's out there than we would have had. So if you had somebody who was questioning their sexuality 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, they didn't really have very many other people or places to kind of connect with and to relate to. And you're probably more likely to think, I'm really weird. There's something wrong with me because people don't talk about this now. Whereas nowadays, you've got a lot more figures out there who are open about their sexuality and things like that, which means that I think you're finding youngsters are feeling more confident, if that's the way that they feel, that they can do it because others are the same out there. Like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean that they might be accepted by the whole of their families as quickly or easily. However, they're probably more likely to have more friends, people around them, their age range, who are more accepting.
Right. Supportive. Yes.
So not judgmental, and I think that's a really big thing, because, it just means that people are able to be who they are.
It's your authentic self. Yeah.
And again, this is never something I set out to write about. This was what just came about because when I started that first story, it was like I said, my characters, they just keep talking to me and I'm crying out, and something was happening there. And then a couple of readers as well were like, really want to know what happens here, really want to know what happens with Bally and Kieran, really want to know what happens. And it just felt like a natural progression to go into their kind of story. And I wrote it, I didn't want to write it with a whole bunch of stereotypes supporting the story, the feeling and everything. So I wrote it, but hey, at the end of the day, I'm not a gay Asian male. So I'm never really going to know whether I'm doing justice to the story or not. So my next dilemma, once I've done it, was, do I want to publish this? And offend people, you know, especially people who are of that background. You know, I need to find somebody to read this, you know, who, you know, I need people who can sensitivity read it, really. And then again, it was finding somebody from the right age range, the right background to read it, because I could find younger guys who are gay quite easily, but they
Right.
would have the same experience of
Right.
somebody
You
20
need,
years
yeah.
previous.
Mhm.
So I have a very good friend who lives in New Zealand, but he's not Indian. He's a New Zealander. And I just, because he was a real champion when I wrote Marriage Unarranged, and I just said to him, look, the subject matter is this, and I know you're a gay guy, you know, would you read it and tell me if I'm doing right or wrong by these
Mhm.
characters, you know, and by the gay community? And he was like, absolutely. And then he said to me afterwards, he read it and he was really positive in his feedback, and he
Mhm.
said, I might not be Sikh, he goes, but I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually the son of an Anglican priest. So if you can imagine them trying to accept the fact that I was gay, you know, there was a lot of parallels in that respect.
Yeah.
So getting him to read it, that was really amazing. Thinking, okay,
It's awesome. Yeah.
certain levels, that's great. I still would love to have somebody though who is Indian, British Asian, to read it though as well.
Mhm.
And I had a couple of other, about 3 or 4 other author friends read purely for the perspective of a reader, and to tell me whether it makes sense. You know, am I going a bit off the loop with anything or not? And again, like I said, they gave me fantastic feedback, some, you know, constructive advice, and a lot of positive sort of words, which was great. And I just remember talking to somebody who I worked with, and she's read the first one, and she's always going on about how excited she is about, you know, whenever the next one comes out. And she's an Asian woman, Sikh woman as well. And I just said to her, you know, this is my only thing now. I'd love to find a gay Asian guy who's around about, you know, in his early 40s maybe, to read
Right.
it. Somebody who actually reads, you know, but who would be interested in reading it to find out if I've, you know, written realistically enough. And she went, why didn't you tell me sooner? And I said, well, she goes, my brother's gay.
Oh,
And she goes, and he's quite an academic. He likes reading and stuff like that. And I said, oh my goodness, well, ask him if he would read it. I'd be, you know, thrilled, and I'd be, you know, just over the moon. And I don't even know how I'd be able to thank him, but you know, if he would read it, then I'm, you know, yes, please, basically. And she checked in with him, and he was like, yes. And he even read Marriage Unarranged first before he started the second one, because he goes, I feel like I want to read it so I get a really good flow.
sure. Yeah.
You know? And he read it, and then he kept on sending his sister messages about what he was thinking as he was reading the first one. And in the end, she goes, I'm just going to give him your number so he can tell you directly, because when he starts reading the second one, I don't want to know, because I want to read it when it's out properly. So, you know, so he did, and he, you know, fed back, and he just gave such positive feedback,
Mhm.
you know, just about, made me feel, you know, that I'd done a good job in terms of the sensitive side of it, and thinking about family dynamics and those kind of feelings, because he'd been through it all.
Right.
Like, he might be open now, but at that time it was a really tough time of his life when
Mhm.
he was at that
Sure.
sort of age, battling with his own feelings and sexuality
Mhm.
and expectations of everybody out there. So, you know, and I think that for me, that was like key. I'm so happy that I had him on board to help me, because I don't know if I would have been confident when it went out.
That's really fantastic. Yeah. So before